Things feel pretty bleak right now for the New York Jets, but a quick turnaround is possible. We'll explore why and how today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, February 6th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GettingTheReadNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Well, today we have our weekly mailbag show. Each Wednesday we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. Thanks so much to everybody who sent in questions. Let's begin. First question is about the team's path forward. John, you talk a lot on the show about 2025 being a reset year for the Jets, where they hopefully show some levels of improvement over 2024, but realistically will not be a competitor. However, with their core talent in place, they could be in the mix for the division and a deep playoff run in 2026. What do you think the Jets need to do this offseason and through 2025 to be ready to win in 2026? The very good question. And I think it's very easy to be pessimistic. It's very understandable to be pessimistic when the team, first of all, has missed the playoffs 14 straight years, but second of all, has just gone through a 2-year stretch like we've gone through, where the Jets essentially promised everybody the world and did not come close to delivering. The Jets talked Super Bowl in 2023 and 2024, and were really just a bad team overall. But I don't think things are as bleak as people believe right now. And a lot of that does go back to the core of talent that the Jets have, is that unlike where we were in 2021 after Adam Gase was fired, and unlike where we were in 2015 after John Idzik was fired, the cupboard is not bare. There actually are good players on this team. And we're talking about a team that was a little unlucky to only win 5 games. In fact, I would say that the 2023 and 2024 teams probably should switch their results, because I think the 2023 team was really more of a 5-win caliber team, and the 2024 team was more of a 7-win caliber team. And I think that if you offer me an over/under, will the Jets go over or under their 5 wins from this year in 2025? I'd go with the over. There is a base of talent on this team that you can build around. And I think that the Jets' biggest mistake is they stopped building around this team. They thought that there was a shortcut to the Super Bowl. They thought just getting Aaron Rodgers was going to take them to the Super Bowl, or at least make them a Super Bowl contender. It just doesn't work that way. There are no shortcuts to the Super Bowl. You have to build around your talent. You have to constantly add young talent. So, the question is, how do the Jets put themselves in position to get ready to win in 2026? And there are a couple things they have to do. First of all, this talk about bringing Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams back cannot happen, because the first step to unclogging the salary cap means not bringing these guys back. It means you just take your medicine on Rodgers with the $49 million in dead money. You cut Adams, you cut Allen Lazard, you add like $36 million in cap space, and you move forward. And I think the next step is getting that that young talent I'm talking about. It's about to not be so young. It's about to be talent that's in its core, that's full of players in their prime. And a lot of them need new contracts. And I would focus on that. I'd focus on sending the message across the league that these guys have been with the New York Jets their whole career, and they want to be here. After spending a couple of years, even losing seasons, even difficult seasons, these guys want to be here. So that's, first of all, re-signing Jamie and Sherwood, as we talked about earlier in the week. It means looking at longer-term deals for Sauce Gardner and for Garrett Wilson. And if they are not getting too crazy with their contract demands, I'd even throw in Elijah Vera Tucker and Breece Hall. Let's have a core of homegrown Jets talent to build around. And then on the field, you know what? I'm allowed to say that I think the Jets are in a reset year in 2025. You're allowed to say it. The media is allowed to say it. But the players and the coaches can't believe that. The players and coaches have to go out and compete, because you know what? Every single year there are teams that overperform preseason expectations, just as there are teams that underperform preseason expectations, as the Jets in 2023 and 2024 did. There are teams that nobody's expecting to be that good and end up going out there and performing at a high level. I think with the Jets in this organization, there's been a tendency when things go wrong to make excuses and to accept failure. And one of my hopes with the hiring of Aaron Glenn as head coach is that those days are over, because we saw Aaron Glenn in Detroit this year. I mean, how easy would it have been for the Detroit Lions to just give up on the defensive side of the ball and say, well, we just have too many injuries? Those guys went out there and continued to compete. Now, you reach a point where you have so many injuries that it's just tough to perform at a high level. But when the Lions got beat on defense, it was because the guys just weren't good enough. It wasn't because they had a bad attitude. It wasn't because they were making excuses. It was not because they stopped fighting. It was just because they didn't have no longer had the horses, so to speak. I want to see this Jets team go out and battle. The 2025 Jets are actually set up to be a success relative to expectations. For the first time in a while, this is a Jets team that has a chance to underpromise and overperform. The Jets of the last couple of years have always been the overpromise and underperform, but nobody's really going to expect them to be that good because of that 14-year drought, because of how last season went, because the expectations were so high and they fell so short. People are going to be really down on the Jets heading into 2025, and probably a little too down, because they do have this base of talent to move forward with. So go out and have a good season. Let's start. The only real way you can start to change the perception is to win games. And I think this team has a shot to do it. I really do think that a lot of it comes down to, did they hire the right people and Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji? I don't know whether they'll work out for a fact, but I think these guys really do have a shot to be quite good. Sometimes you hire somebody, right off the bat, it's not going to work. That's the way it was with Adam Gase. That's not the way it is here. This is a duo that really could work out quite well. A lot of it does come down to ownership. Will ownership allow them to? But I think that the pieces are there for the Jets to really make a move, potentially make a move. I mean, in the NFL, you're never as far away as you think you are. And that's especially true when you've had 14 straight seasons where you missed the playoffs. It feels hopeless, but it's not always hopeless. Next question, John. I think everyone is excited for the new coaching and general manager hires. However, part of me is just waiting for the Johnson family to insert their football genius and ruin things again. What can the Jets do that would leave you optimistic this offseason that the Johnsons are taking a backseat and letting this regime carve out its own path? Well, there's nothing the Johnsons can do right now, because the Johnsons have zero credibility. I think it's just one of those things you hope. When you have leadership this bad, and it's not just in football, it's in life in general. If you work at a company where the leadership is this bad, at some point there's nothing they can say to make you feel better. You have to sit back and hope that things get better. And to the extent you can call it out, like I'll call it out on this podcast, you as fans call it out. That's really all we can do right now, because the Johnson family has no credibility, and they can say that they're going to let these guys run the show. They can say, well, this time's going to be different. The proof will be in the results. Look, I don't think that the Johnson family is sentenced to forever be terrible owners, but if we're looking at the performance of the last 14 years, they have done an abysmal job. And there's really nothing they can say over the course of one offseason that's going to change perceptions on that. Nor should there be, because they've done a terrible job. And if Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji end up being successful, that does not invalidate the criticisms of them over the last 4 years. It would be a sign that there has been growth, that there's been improvement. But look, I think until they prove that they're not going to do it, the fear should always be there. And I don't think the fear is bad, because the fear at least means that we can call them to account and that we can hold them accountable if they try and do it. But, look, I think that at this point, with the way the Johnsons have operated, they have zero credibility. And there's, it has to be a fear, and it has to be on everybody's radar moving forward. I think that's just the way it is. And I think that this is what they've done to themselves through their horrific management of this team. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, let's talk about the new Jets offensive coordinator, Tanner Engstrand. There's a lot of optimism around him. Is it justified? I think so, and I'll explain why as we continue here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Gametime. Looking for tickets to your next big event? Maybe last-minute tickets to the big game next week? Whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Gametime Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Gametime Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. And the best part, you're covered with Gametime's lowest price guaranteed. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund it 100%, 110% of the difference. Plus, if your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. I've used Gametime myself. I don't just talk about it here. I've used it to go to see a couple shows on Broadway. I've gone to US Open tennis. I've gone to football. I like the fact that give you the view from your seat so you know exactly what you're going to see when you arrive at your venue. I also like their all-in pricing, no hidden fees at the end. You know exactly what you're going to pay when you buy. Ready to make your next event even better? Well, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now with our weekly mailbag. Our next question, JB, you are high on Tanner Engstrand as offensive coordinator. I am worried he does not have enough NFL offensive experience. I hope this is not another Mike LaFleur debacle. Well, I certainly hope he does better than Mike LaFleur did. But I can't say that Tanner Engstrand lacks the requisite NFL experience. I mean, he was the passing game coordinator for the league's most dynamic offense. Now, that does not guarantee that he's going to be a success. And when I say that, I like the hire, that does not mean that I'm 100% sold on Tanner Engstrand. I'm not sure I could be 100% sold on any candidate. And I understand the concerns. I mean, look, he has not been in the NFL that long. But I think that the things that you're looking for in an offensive coordinator, or at least the things I'm looking for, are somebody who's, kind of focused on building a cutting edge offense. And I think over the last couple of years, there's been no offense that's been more cutting edge than Detroit. And Tanner Engstrand played a hand in that. Now, how much of a hand did he play in that? They obviously had a very good offensive coordinator in Ben Johnson, who is now the head coach of the Chicago Bears. They also had, a tremendous amount of talent on the offensive line. That's maybe the best offensive line in the league. They had a quality quarterback in Jared Goff. They had quality players across the skill positions, Laporta at tight end, the receivers they have, the backs they have. I think it's fair to question, how much did Tanner Engstrand really have to do? But what I'm looking for the Jets is, somebody kind of like the next great offensive coordinator. I think what you're looking for is the next Ben Johnson. And while Tanner Engstrand working for Ben Johnson does not guarantee he'll be that guy, I think this is an exciting hire. I think if you're looking for the traits that would be good for an offensive coordinator for the Jets, Engstrand has them. He's kind of young. He's an up-and-comer. Yeah, he's worked in that great system. He's, at least to some extent, played a role in that Detroit offense. So you never know how somebody's going to be when they take a higher job. And I'm not here to guarantee Tanner Engstrand is going to be great. And look, although I think the Jets roster is not terrible, it's obviously not on the Detroit roster level right now. And we also have question marks at the quarterback position. So look, all those concerns are understood. But in many ways, how good of a coach you are comes down to how good your players are. And I think it'll be interesting to see Ben Johnson in Chicago because, he's not going to have the same incredibly talented offense in Chicago that he had in Detroit. And we bring up Mike LaFleur. Well, I don't think Mike LaFleur was unqualified to be an offensive coordinator. In fact, he's gone to the Rams, and even understanding that Sean McVay is really the guy in charge of that offense. McVay has said that he's delegated to LaFleur in a way he has not delegated to any of his other offensive coaches. LaFleur, a lot of his schemes were pretty good. A lot of his play designs were really good. Biggest problem the Jets had, honestly, and I hate to say it because I don't want to pile on, but the biggest problem the Jets had was they just didn't have a quarterback who could execute his offense. So, if the Jets go out and get a quarterback who can execute Tanner Engstrand's offense and they build a good offensive line, I mean, I think the odds are Engstrand's going to look pretty good. The question is, with coaches, the coaches never make you good or bad. The question is always does the coach maximize what he can get from his players? It's does he take a good player and make him great? Does he take a good player and put him in a position to be great? That's the stuff. Does he take an average player and put him in a position where he looks average? Do you take players and put them in positions that accentuate their skill sets and avoid the areas where they're flawed? And do you do things that make life easier on your players? Do you use motions in a way that defenses are more likely to bust coverages? The corners are trying to switch two guys off and there's a miscommunication. Those are the things you judge coaches on. And I think based on what I know about Engstrand, he could do well there. Again, there's no guarantees though. And while I'm high on him, I don't want that to be viewed as me saying that Tanner Engstrand's a slam dunk, that there's no way he could fail. It's kind of an educated guess based on his resume and based on some of the background stuff you hear about him. Next question, John. Would you agree that the last 3 failed coaches the Jets hired were all bad at dealing with the New York media? Do you think that was a significant factor to their failure and part of the reason the Jets hired a former player who had experience in this market? Yes, I do think so. The last 3 coaches would be Robert Saleh, Adam Gase, and Todd Bowles. And yes, I think all 3 of them were poor at dealing with the New York media. I think that's a fair thing to say. They were bad in different ways. I thought that Gase was always very defensive when he was questioned, and Saleh and Bowles were guys who just like said stuff that objectively wasn't true, and I think it gave the perception that they didn't know what was going on with their team. It gave the perception they were out of touch. I don't think that was the reason they failed, though. I think the reason they failed was they just weren't good enough coaches, that the team didn't win enough. Where I think media relations comes into play is I think it's one of those things that maybe buys you a little extra time if you're good at it and if you can sell the case to the media, because in many ways you're speaking to the fan base through the media. And with the Jets, we know that the media and the fan base both have a lot of influence over the owner. So I think being good with the media, if you can articulate a story and say, well, we're losing now, but here's why, and we're going to win in the future. Either we're rebuilding or these injuries have destroyed us this year. If you're good at selling that story, it buys you a little grace. It buys you a little bit of extra time. That's the reason like Adam Gase only lasted 2 years, because he just was bad at the media. He was bad at trying to explain why the Jets were losing. At some point, if you win, it doesn't matter how bad you are at the media. You can be terrible at the media. If you win games, no one's going to care. If you lose games, at some point, media is not being good with the media is not going to save you. But ultimately, if it's kind of like up in the air, it's kind of like, well, they're losing right now. Should we cut them some slack? That's where I think media relations, I think it can maybe like buy you an extra year if you're effective at communicating with the media. Now, is that the reason the Jets hired Glenn? I think the media does play a role in the Jets hiring Glenn. The question mentioned that he has experience dealing with the New York media as a player, so he understands how to do it. I think that matters. I also think, look, it's the Jets, and with this ownership, optics matter. This ownership cares a lot about media praise, and the higher of the candidates who are actually interested in working for the Jets, the higher that would generate the most praise, the higher that would be the most popular in the fan base and in the media is the hometown hero coming home. The guy who was a great corner for the Jets for many years, who just had a big year with Detroit's defense. That was always going to be like the most popular hire the Jets could make, assuming Ben Johnson wasn't interested, which he wasn't. So I think that did play. I think the media played a role from that standpoint. And I'm sure it also played a role from the standpoint that Glenn does know how to deal with the New York media. I mean, you saw that opening introductory press conference was a masterclass. The guy knows exactly what he's getting. There's no surprises here. I think sometimes coaches think that they know what they're getting, being a head coach in this market, and they don't really, they underestimate how difficult it's going to be. I don't think Glenn's going to underestimate it. I think he knows exactly what he's getting into. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the most important position on the field. There are options for the Jets at quarterback. Unfortunately, none of them are inspiring. Some options are less uninspiring than others. Let's try and get through all of this. Let's try and offer some clarity as we continue here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by PrizePicks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions of winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. And here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw for 1 yard. Pair that with one more correct pick, and you're cashing out. Check out the promos tab to tail any of the Super Bowl Millie winners' big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can split $1 million in promo funds. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDON NFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Wednesday. We're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question, John, what would you say about Jimmy Garoppolo, Mac Jones, or Kirk Cousins as possible bridge quarterback options for next year? And yeah, these are our options. These are really not very good options. I would say no to Garoppolo simply because he can't stay healthy. And I've never been a huge fan of Jimmy Garoppolo, so I'd be a no on him. For Mac Jones, I'd be very unenthused. I guess if he comes cheap, the thing with Mac Jones is there's really only 1 year of solid play. It was 2021, his rookie season with New England, and he really hasn't shown anything since then. Again, I do think the Jets would be well advised if try and find some sort of reclamation project. So I guess maybe the glass is half full view on Mac Jones is, unlike a lot of the other first round busts, there actually is a solid year that he's put up. So there's something lurking inside him. The question is, that's been 4 years removed from that. So would it be, could you find something in Mac Jones? I guess he wouldn't be my first choice, but I am of the mindset the Jets should just load their quarterback room with upside options. So I guess, I wouldn't bring him in to be the undisputed starter. But if he's part of a mix where he's competing for the starting job and maybe you think you can tap something in him and he's going to be cheap, then I guess that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Kirk Cousins, I was going to say no, but I actually thought this through, and I wouldn't sign Kirk Cousins for like any substantial amount of money, but it's going to be like a Russell Wilson situation because the Falcons are probably going to let him go, and the Falcons essentially owe him a bunch of guaranteed money. So Cousins is pretty much going to cost nothing. I mean, you'll be able to get him for probably $1 million, and I would not pay $20 million for Kirk Cousins, but price does matter. And at like $1 million, it's essentially like a free lottery ticket because we've seen Kirk Cousins play at a much higher level in the past. What we saw last year from Kirk Cousins is not typical in his career. Now, it could be just a sign he's finished. It could be a sign the Achilles injury, was the last straw for him, and that his career is going downhill. I think we have some experience in that department. But at the price he's going to cost, it's almost worth it because it doesn't, if he stinks, then he stinks. Then you cut him or you bench him or something like that. But his baseline level of play through his career has obviously been much higher than what he showed last year in Atlanta. And last year in Atlanta, he was probably better than Aaron Rodgers was with the Jets. So he'd probably be an upgrade at the quarterback position. So, I actually think like Cousins would be a risk-free move. You try and get him if he bounces back, maybe he can be your quarterback for the next 2 to 3 years. If he doesn't, then it's not a big deal. Again, I wouldn't pay Cousins. I would if Cousins costs more money, Cousins cost any money, I would not be in on it. But he's probably actually one of the better upside plays, as unexciting as it is. And the fact he's one of the better upside plays kind of shows you that, how tough the quarterback situation is for the Jets right now. Next question. Sauce Gardner had a down year, which happens. What do you think the chances are Aaron Glenn can get him back to where he played in his first 2 seasons? If you were the GM, would you exercise his 5th-year option? Sauce Gardner had a down year. I mean, the thing with the Jets, though, is like a lot of guys had the down years. And you get to a point where you almost wonder, like, how many players were just caught in the undertow of how the season just went off the rails. Quinton Williams had a bad year too. There are lots of guys who just did not perform up to expectations for this team, and Sauce Gardner was among them. I think it's a no-brainer. You pick up his 5th-year option. So this is the offseason where the Jets need to decide. Sauce Gardner has a team option for his 5th year and his rookie contract that would keep him under team control through 2026. I think it's a no-brainer. You pick it up because he's a guy who's been in the league 3 years, and in 2 of those years he's been a first-team All-Pro. Glenn's defense is actually going to lean more on Sauce Gardner than Robert Saleh's defense did. Robert Saleh's defense, the most important spot was defensive line because the Jets were a team that rushed 4 a lot. They played a lot of coverage, 7 guys back. Aaron Glenn's defense is going to blitz more. Aaron Glenn is one of the defensive coaches most prone to blitzing in the league. And when you blitz, that means you play a lot more man-to-man coverage. So corner was important in Robert Saleh's system. I'm not saying it wasn't, but it's more important in Aaron Glenn's defense. Aaron Glenn's defense is built around the secondary. Robert Saleh's defense was built around the defensive line. So if anything, Sauce Gardner becomes an even more important player for this defense. And that's especially true because I think you have to assume the Jets are going to lose DJ Reed. DJ Reed just kind of signaled, I'm on my way out. Now, is it conceivable Glenn being around here could change it? I guess. I know Glenn was a very popular hire in the locker room, but I think you have to assume DJ Reed's gone, which means Sauce Gardner could very well find himself in a role where he's the number 1 corner. He's shadowing the other team's best receiver all week, all game, and in big situations. The Jets are going to send the house, and it's going to be Sauce Gardner one-on-one against the other team's best receiver to determine whether a drive continues or ends. So Sauce Gardner is going to be a critical player for this team going forward. In fact, going back to what I said a little bit earlier, I would he's now officially eligible for a contract extension because the way the rules of the league dictate that players in their first 3 years are not eligible to sign long-term contract extensions, but after season 3, they become eligible to sign long-term contract extensions. I would look to lock Sauce up. And it's a bit of a gamble because he did have a down year in 2024, but I'm going to roll the dice and say that maybe that had to do with just the team's overall, level of dysfunction. I think there are lots of guys who did not perform up to their normal standard last year. So maybe Sauce can bounce back. I think but I think, yeah, Sauce Gardner should be a Jet for the long run. I think there's no question about that. And our last question, John, I wish the integrity of the game was better. It's becoming more and more deflating to watch when it seems rigged for the Chiefs to win. It also feels like you need 12 different streaming services to enjoy the game too. Aside from doing this as a job, what pushes you to watch the games? I'm at a what's point of watching phase where the ref ball is terrible and can ruin the game. I don't care if a flag goes against the team I'm rooting for, but when there seems to be favoritism and a lack of consistency, it's hard to watch. You can't even review or challenge a lot of the decisions the ref makes. How does the league even fix this? Replay assistant can determine certain things, but not others. It's very confusing, and it seems at times deliberate. Like replay assist couldn't have seen when Sam Darnold obviously got slammed down by a face mask to end the Rams-Vikings game. It's just frustrating when the integrity of the game is becoming more and more of a joke. P.S. If you talk about Patrick Mahomes in an unfavorable way, you may get a 15-yard penalty. Yeah, I think that those are fair statements. And I think to the extent the league has a credibility issue, it's created it because you watch these games and you see like how slanted the officials are towards Kansas City. I mean, blown calls are a part of the game, but I think that I think one of the things that makes it difficult is the league doesn't utilize all the technology it has. I mean, the league could have at least now talking about because of what happened in the Buffalo Kansas City game. Well, maybe we should put a chip in the ball to determine whether the ball makes it for a first down. It's like you could have done that years ago. We've had the technology to do this for a long time. And as you mentioned, the replay assistant should be able to overturn any call. Like there's face masks that aren't getting overturned. When you can see, sometimes face masks are called, and you can see on replay there clearly was no face mask, or vice versa. Sometimes the refs miss a face mask. Why can't they overturn that? There's a real lack of transparency. I agree with that. The league just needs to do better. The league needs to stop this. The league needs to actually hold people accountable. I know I've used that phrase a lot this year, but in the different context, the league needs to hold people accountable. If you blow calls, there needs to be some sort of reprimand for that. And going beyond that, I think one step the league could take is put microphones on the officials, so that way we can hear what's happening as they deliberate these calls. And at least if they blow a call, we can understand why they did that. There was a minor league a few years back, the Alliance of American Football, that did this. And I think it added a lot to transparency. And while it may not improve competence, it at least eliminate the conspiracy theories. It'll at least explain to you what the officials are seeing, and it'll allow the fans to evaluate these officials in a way that they can't right now. So I think that would be a good step towards transparency. But I agree with you. I think this league is becoming more. I hate to be this person because I always hate the back in my day people things were better, but I agree. This league is becoming more and more difficult to watch, and I guess part of it's I root for the team that's been the least successful over the last decade and a half, but the league has some real issues it has to fix and that starts with officiating. So I mean, those would be my three solutions. Would be, first of all, utilize all the technology you got. Don't wait for it to end a team season to introduce technology. Number two is allow the referee assist to overturn any call. And number three is mic up the officials and let us hear what they're saying as they deliberate these critical calls. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoyed the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.